I first met Ivor Birtwistle at an adult education book club meeting. Now, it was at one of those book club meetings, which I've worked out to be about 1966, that the subject of preserving our history first came up. Quite a few of the book club members knew Ivor had been a foundation member of the Royal WA Historical Society, and they felt that they should actually bring it to his attention their great concern about the number of district landmarks that were disappearing, mostly under the bulldozer at the time, and people were beginning to get very, very concerned about the loss of history in what is such a historic area of Kelmscott and Armadale. And it was one of the ladies at the book club, I think, Mrs. Eva Powell, who said to him, "Mr. Birtwistle, we really should start up a historical society, don't you think?" And that's how the idea began. And, of course, it went from there. Ivor, of course, liaised with his friends in council, and we actually called a public meeting in 1967, I think it was, in the November of 1967, and we began the Historical Society. So it was Mrs. Sharp who said very firmly that she felt that we should be, right from the start, setting aside a building fund so that if a future historic house came up for sale, we may be able to prevail upon council to help us to buy it. And so that was the beginning of our building fund, and we actually actively fundraised. We knew that we would have to have somewhere to show the items we were already taking into care, and that was the beginning. And it was then that I think he said pensively to the rest of the committee, "Well, why don't we consider building a new building, a museum for Armadale and Kelmscott?" And he and Mr. Doug Morgan immediately made appointments to see the town clerk and the treasurer of the council to find out how we would stand if in fact we decided to build a new museum building. And that was the beginning, of course, of History House. Mr. Birtwistle already had it in his mind that it would be on that particular land, which was pretty historic, the site of Minnawarra Homestead, and he already had worked out that that would be an ideal place for a new historic building, a museum. And he was absolutely afire with enthusiasm about the building of the new museum. He had, as I say, many contacts in the city. We met very early with the WA Museum Board to decide exactly what form a building should take and how you could show historic items in a modern building. In fact, at the time that History House was built, it was only the second custom-built museum in Western Australia. Ivor moved into the community and he was convinced that the whole community had to be involved, rather just the Historical Society. So he made himself available as a guest speaker to Rotary, to Lions, to Apex. Everybody had a visit from Mr. Morgan and Mr. Birtwistle to speak about the possibility of the new museum, and to our delight most of them picked up the baton and decided that it was a very good idea. So hence our ties to Rotary and Apex and people and Lions and people like that. They were very, very supportive of it as an idea. At the time, I was not aware that Mr. Birtwistle was ill. I thought he had a heart condition of some kind, but it never showed. And he lived to see the triumphal day when History House was opened, and he'd managed to persuade the Australian Governor-General, Sir Paul Hasluck, his bosom friend from long ago, to make a special trip out on Anzac Day. Because he happened to be in town for Anzac Day celebrations, he made a special trip out to open open history house, and he was absolutely afire with enthusiasm at that time. He'd recruited a wonderful team, an architect, Philip Pritchard, and Phil had drawn up an imaginative building design for us, which was designed to show old artefacts on its walls. And although it was a modern form of building, it still evoked ideas of the old farm shed, heavy jarrah beams and rough cast walls on which everything could be shown to advantage.